Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Strategies for Creating Socially Just Assessments, which is part of the Innovative Assessments Symposium sponsored by FACT2. And I'm just going to show you who we are in our group. Most of us you'll hear from today, and then you'll see our names again at the end if you want to know anybody's contact information. But this group is part of this overall task group whose mission was to explore alternative ways of assessing student performance, including feedback and grading. So we had 4 subgroups: multiple pathways, real world assessment, and diversity and equity, which is our group, and the learning recognition assessment group. The symposium has been all through the month of April, each Thursday, and we are the 3rd one. Next week, there's one more left, the Reexamining Assessing Classroom Learning Using ePortfolios. So please come back next week for that one. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and let him talk to you about what our group did specifically.
Yeah, so our group, if you go to the website for the FACT2 task group on innovative assessments, I encourage you to check out the resources that we collected around social justice assessment. And so you can see the screenshot there. There's the link to the website. I think, Megan, we were going to share the links in the chat, right? There's the link to the website. So I think as you'll see, and as you hear from the presenters today, you're going to hear a lot of similarities from some of the previous sessions that have taken place as part of the symposium. I think that you also find with this area of assessment that the emphasis is somewhat different. So the strategies will look similar, but what the reasons for why you're pursuing these types of assessments is highlighted. So maybe you can go to the next slide. So, as I said, we researched social justice assessment generally. You could find the results of our research on the previous page. And then we did look at strategies for doing this and, obviously curate resources, examples, and best practices for you. But I think, for many of you, it might just be a new way of thinking about things you're already doing when you start to focus on equity and social justice and in the way you assess your students. So this is what it is. It's innovative and really, again, in that different type of emphasis. We typically think of assessment as, ranking students or evaluating performance, winners and losers, that sort of thing. Social justice assessment kind of criticizes that approach to assessment, takes a critical stance towards it, and it tries to look at the learning achieved by diverse students, but while still looking at specific learning objectives, but also putting them in the context of dominant norms that exist. So it's taking a critical stance towards assessment while still having the overarching goal of trying to help students learn what it is they're supposed to be learning in your course, and using assessment to help them do that. And so it's innovative, and I think the innovative piece you'll find, and again, the innovative piece will really be kind of, you'll hear about innovative strategies that you've heard about already. So like contract grading or labor-based grading is one that we'll highlight today. And they're innovative in that they are not the norm. They're definitely not used by most faculty. But I think the reason what appeals to me about social justice assessment is this idea of just thinking differently about why you assess students and the context around that type of assessment. All right.
Okay, on this slide, we have included some examples of factors that inform the experiences of our students and how they learn, and also how they may interact with an assessment task that they're given as a part of a class. So the factors that we've included here are race, culture, language proficiency, socioeconomic status, and disability. And I'm sure that there are many factors that we did not include, but these seem to be some of the really dominant factors that are experienced by many of our students. And many of our students experience more than one of these factors. And it's as we think about these factors and our students, and as we get ready to create assessments, it's really important to recognize that our students' backgrounds are potentially very different from our own. Next slide, please. Thank you. And on the slide after this one, I'm actually going to introduce equitable assessment. Before I do that, I do want to just take a quick minute to sort of discuss and clarify the difference between equality and equity. And this is a picture that I think has been around for a while, but it is a really good illustration of the difference. If we look at equality on the left, equality indicates that, or it dictates that every person is provided with the same level of support up front. So the quality of being equal is sort of front loaded. Everyone receives the same thing. But we can see that that's not always appropriate. So we have 3 different heights of people trying to look over a fence to watch a baseball game. We have a tall person, a medium height person, and a short person. And even though each person is given one box to stand on, we have our tall person who did not need the box in the first place. We have our medium height person who can see just fine with one box, but that one box still isn't quite enough for the shorter person. Okay, so even though everyone was given something, they were all given the same thing, it didn't really play into the exact needs of our individuals that we have here watching the game. So when we look at equity, equity really has more of an end goal of equality of a quality of being equal. So that is the result. That's the end goal, is that everyone can participate on a similar level. So here we have our tall person with no box to stand on and they can see just fine. We have our medium height person with one box, and then our short person now has 2 boxes. So everyone is able to participate and be successful. So when we think about this through the lens of assessment, we really need to understand that all of our students are different and have different needs and different experiences, and that there are really many different ways that they can demonstrate learning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is equitable assessment? So equitable assessment really is sort of an umbrella for many of the other strategies that our team is going to start discussing in a couple of minutes here. We all know that the goal of assessment in general is to understand what students have learned so we can adjust teaching practices accordingly. In our research, we have discovered that there are a number of limitations that are created by the traditional assessments that we have all grown up with. And we have found that these traditional assessments tend to favor students who are white, affluent, high achieving students. And sort of an effect of that is that students that are in those marginalized groups or who have one of those social justice factors tend to be at a disadvantage. So these assessments can be a pretty inaccurate representation of the learning that has taken place because of the barriers that exist in those assessments. So what equitable assessment does is it aims to really focus on the personal achievement and the growth of the students. You know, how did the individual do over the course of the semester? What did they learn? Where did they start and where did they end up? And it really embraces the diversity of our students and recognizes, again, that there are lots of different ways that a student can demonstrate what they have learned, and it can create a lot of opportunities for creativity as well. And that's kind of a really cool side effect of equitable assessment. And what we really need to do if we want our assessments to be equitable is to really focus on the learning objectives and maybe do a little backwards design and really look at what is important and exactly what is it that the students need to be learning, and then remove all of the other barriers that could stand in the way of that learning. Next slide, please.
All right, that's me. So as Megan noted, one of the outcomes of a lot of equitable assessment strategies is that the focus is shifted from product to process in order to better understand individual student learning gains and to create opportunities for student agency within the assessment. One way of doing this is through an approach called labor-based grading. This approach is also commonly referred to as contract grading, which may sound familiar if you attended the multiple pathways presentation 2 weeks ago. In that case, contract grading offered a way for students to have increased agency in their course progress. Here, the mechanism is similar, but the motivation is slightly different, with a central goal of increased equity in the classroom. At its core, labor-based grading is a form of assessment that values the time or labor students spend on their coursework. As you can see in the sample on the screen, the labor might include activities like attending class and completing assignments in a timely manner. And those labor expectations could also be expanded to include elements like one-on-one conferences. They could include distinctions between large and small assignments, or meeting other process-based requirements like labor logs, project revisions, or reflective components. Generally, a labor-based grading contract lays out certain minimum requirements, which, if fulfilled, guarantees the student a certain grade. Student expectations are clear, and it's up to the student to complete the labor to achieve their desired grade in the course. Essentially, labor-based grading asks instructors to offer grades for process as opposed to product. While students should receive ample feedback on the content and the quality of their work throughout the course, that feedback is decoupled from number or letter grades. So what does this look like in practice? There are lots of different models for developing those labor expectations. In some cases, the instructor provides a contract at the start of the course. In other cases, the instructor and the students might collaboratively negotiate a contract at the beginning of the term, which offers students greater agency in that process. And some scholars, like Peter Elbow, suggest a guaranteed B model, where meeting labor expectations can earn students a B, but to achieve a higher grade, students would need to excel in some way, perhaps by exhibiting really extra high quality work or completing additional mastery assignments that go above and beyond the basic learning outcomes. More recently, Asao Inoue has advocated for a completely labor-based grading system as a more equitable approach to labor-based grading. There are several benefits to this approach. First, because students are graded on labor, they have the space to take more risks with their work rather than aiming for correctness. And the feedback they receive from their instructor can focus more on improving and encouraging the student work instead of justifying a grade. But I think most importantly for this conversation, because the system privileges students who are investing time and effort into their learning, all students have the same potential to earn a high grade in the course, regardless of their knowledge or ability with the subject matter prior to the start of the course. In writing classes, for example, labor-based grading can help to avoid grade disparities based on language differences. The student who maybe comes from a background where they were not speaking standard American English, or maybe come from a multilingual household, may put in much more time on their work than a student who comes from that classic standard American English household and still get a lower grade. In the labor-based grading classroom, the students are equalized in some ways. One common concern with this approach is that it might disadvantage those students with more responsibilities and time commitments outside of the classroom. And I think that there are lots of valid points to this argument, but I think we also need to consider some of the hidden time and quality expectations baked into traditional grading systems. I think we can switch to the next slide. Thank you. All right, our next approach is ungrading, Like labor-based grading, ungrading seeks to disconnect feedback from assessment. The two approaches share a goal of moving away from standardized grading metrics, but where labor-based grading shifts the focus to grading student labor, ungrading seeks to deprioritize or even eliminate entirely numerical grades. Instead, instructors are encouraged to focus on providing learner feedback that encourages growth throughout the semester. Proponents of ungrading argue that traditional grading seeks to force uniformity among diverse student populations, that it provides an incomplete picture of student learning, and that it doesn't truly motivate student learning. One ungrading expert, Sean Michael Morris, has argued, quote, "At the foundation of ungrading lies something that should change school entirely, a suggestion that ranking and evaluation and the concomitant expertise of the ranker or evaluator is entirely an optional way of viewing things. Ungrading should, when it's done, rearrange the room, placing the teacher in amongst the students, dismantling the podium, rewriting textbooks such that the class itself becomes the text and the rubric for comprehension of that text, no less than a steady engagement with one another," end quote. So ungrading attempts to humanize the learning process. It's an approach that requires a really high level of trust and respect between the teacher and the students. Like labor-based grading, it gives students the freedom to take risks and be creative, and teachers are able to focus on genuine student feedback rather than scoring or grading against a set of expectations. But I know the big question with ungrading is always, how do students earn the grades that they receive at the end of the semester? We still function within a system that requires us to assign grades. In a completely ungraded classroom, student grades might be based on a final student reflection or a one-on-one conversation between the student and the teacher about the grade the student has earned. Because ungrading is a rejection of transactional grading systems, the final grade becomes less important compared to the true learning that has occurred throughout the semester. One second. Oh, I'm on a marathon. Okay, so there are smaller ways to embrace ungrading in the classroom, depending on the teacher's comfort level, subject matter, and pedagogical goals. Many instructors choose to wade into ungrading in small ways first, and we've listed some of those methods on the slide here. Grade-free zones is a good way to wade into ungrading. One would determine a period of the semester that's free from numerical grades, often at the beginning of the semester as students gain comfort with the subject matter. Another approach is minimal grading, which would be using grading measures that simplify grading, like pass-fail, strong, satisfactory, or weak, or even assigning but not collecting certain assignments. Another approach would be self-assessment, which might look like process letters or process portfolios, which would require students to evaluate their own progress by discussing their learning in the course, pointing to specific work they've completed and how it relates to the course goals. Peer assessment would be an approach for group projects, which would have students write reflections on what they did as individuals and how others contributed. And finally, student-made rubrics allow faculty to turn over some of the power of the assessment process by encouraging students to create their own grading criteria based on their knowledge of the subject matter. And as instructors gain comfort with this approach, they may decide to kind of wade into larger scale approaches of ungrading. And the final point you'll see on this slide is just a link to Jessie Stommel, who is one of the foremost experts on ungrading and has lots of great resources on this approach. And I think I'll turn it over to Shanna now.
Right. Thanks, Caitlin. So when we think about our students and we think about our learning and assessment environments, there are some simple adjustments we can make to remove these barriers that our students might encounter. But one of the things we have to consider before we think about removing barriers is identifying those barriers. So trying to determine what those barriers might be in terms of not only our perceptions, but our students' own experiences. And so we have to reflect on our own experiences in order to identify those barriers. And so one thing that we can do is reflect on how we have been assessed as students. So going back to our own experiences in the classroom and thinking about how we've been assessed. Are we simply doing for our own students what has been done to us, or are we branching out and doing something different? We tend to do what we have experienced ourselves as students. And the other important thing to reflect on is, what did our instructors look like? Did our instructors look like mirrors of ourselves, or did our instructors look different from who we are as individuals? And if there was a mirror, chances are our instructors and we shared a common experience in some ways. And so maybe we didn't experience barriers, but if our instructors look different from us, it's important to consider that maybe we were exposed to other ways of doing things and other forms of assessment. And so same thing, if we look out at our student population, are we being mindful of the different things that our students bring to the experience, and are we pairing our assessment choices with those? And so things that we might want to consider in terms of whether there is that commonality or not, to things like ethnicity, culture, language background, class, abilities. And so those are just some things to consider. If we haven't experienced barriers ourselves, then how do we know what barriers our students might be experiencing? The other thing is looking at our students themselves and asking them about their own experiences. So this is one thing that's been challenging for us as a group to find. So if anyone has anything to share in terms of this or any resources for us, what are students saying about this? What have students shared about the barriers that they've experienced in terms of assessment? And perhaps it's not something that's being asked often enough or broadly enough of our students. And so that's something else that we could challenge ourselves with, is to just ask our students, what experiences have you had in terms of barriers to assessment? And the prior bullet there, looking at what is it we're assessing, and this goes along with a lot of what Caitlin was just sharing, that if what we're assessing includes things that maybe there are aspects of that don't need a number grade or a letter grade, and they're not within that target, how can we shift what it is that we're collecting in terms of the data? Some ways to ask our students, one is just to have individual conversations with them, but another thing we can do is share some surveys with them that are anonymous, where they can feel perhaps more comfortable sharing their experiences with us. Going back to asking ourselves what we're assessing, is it necessary to be assessing the things that we have been? So one example of that might be, depending upon the circumstance, and I know we'll talk about this later too, conventions of written English. And so perhaps in some cases, yes, it's very important. And in other cases, perhaps like a journal entry, it's not. So how can we focus more on the content that our students are sharing? And it depends on the field we're in as well. I work with pre-service teachers. And so for me, it's a very important aspect to look at scoring the conventions of written English in a lot of circumstances, because they're going to be models of the language for their own students, but also to give them those opportunities where it is grade free, as Caitlin was talking about there. So some of the simple adjustments that we might want to consider also depend upon if we're teaching face-to-face, if we're teaching online, and why, where, and for whom we are making these adjustments. And so we'll consider, especially looking at online tests, looking at time limits. Is it really necessary to have a time limit on some of these assessments for our students? Could we give extra time? Could we give unlimited time? Perhaps looking at forced completion, where it just shuts off, versus giving them a message, your time's up, but you can continue. Looking at those options of being able to stop and restart. looking at revisiting initial responses and being able to make changes. So for example, if an assessment particularly is online and students might go through the entire assessment and then remember something or rethink something from a previous question, giving them that opportunity to go back and make those changes. I already talked about spelling and conventions of written English, looking at the creation of multiple choice and selected response questions. And I think a lot of times, a lot of us haven't had any formal training or done a lot of research in what makes a good quality multiple choice or selected response question. So digging into that research ourselves and crafting our questions in a way that might be more equitable and appropriate for our students. But within that, we could do things like remove all of the above options or some of the above options to try to take out that piece that might feel tricky for our students. Another thing that we could do is have conditional release of different forms of questions. And so we can craft a lot of questions and then have them built in so that they are released according to what the students are demonstrating in their performance. And next, I think Chris is going to share some resources with us. That's me. Sorry, Chris.
I was going to say, I'm happy to do it.
I'm going to share some resources. Sorry about that. So yeah, so we have a form here. And I think someone can put it in the link for us here. So if you would like to share some practices from your own teaching, please go ahead and do that. Not necessarily during the presentation, but at any point, and feel free to share this with others too, because again, we're collecting ideas from people and these are shared on this website so that people can go back and incorporate them in their own work. One other thing that we are offering as a collaborative tool for everyone today is to respond on our Jamboard, and we'll have the link for that in the chat as well. And we have a couple of different slides here on the Jamboard, so you can forward through and go back. But the first one is looking at an example from your own current practice that you can share that's in line with the topics we've been talking about today. And then secondly, what strategy or adjustment do you think you'd like to try given what you've heard today and something that you might want to use with your current students. So I think too, Judy, do you want to go ahead and put that Jamboard up on the screen there, and then we can start to see folks' contributions there. All right, yeah, so go ahead and just add your own strategies that you're currently using on that first one, and the second one, what are some things you'd like to try? And we just have some sample ones up there. Oh, and then we do have a third one there. What additional support do you feel like you need in order to implement some of these? And so we recognize that there can certainly be some restrictions and barriers for ourselves as instructors, where maybe we don't have the folks that we can collaborate with on our own campuses who maybe are trying these things, or we're not sure how to get in touch with them. So we'd love to hear what additional supports you feel like you would need. So feel free to play with those and add in your own contributions.
So while people are filling out the Jamboard, we did have a question in the chat from Claudia a few minutes ago. So if the group wants to listen, I'll read it out. Claudia said, some faculty have expressed concerns about students professor shopping when enrolling for courses. Do you have any thoughts for courses with multiple sections as regard, in regard to social justice assessment?
I can take a stab at that one if you'd like. I'm very familiar with this issue because I am our writing program coordinator, and we know that this happens with our first year writing classes. We offer so many of them. And professor shopping is a problem currently for us with traditional grading practices. It's something that has kind of been facilitated and made worse by Rate My Professor, where students can identify the ones who are going to be the easy A and opt into the courses that they think will be easier if that's what they want. I will say, though, that though the grading mechanisms are different in an ungrading or a labor-based grading classroom, they are often no less rigorous. And in fact, they often are more rigorous in some ways because so much more of the onus is placed on the students. So professor shopping is a problem. I just don't know that it is necessarily made worse by these approaches. I would be happy, though, to hear my colleagues' thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, Caitlin, that if anything, students, when they take a class that takes a social justice approach or an alternative or innovative approach to assessment, unless you're really clear about, what you're doing and why you're doing it and how they'll be evaluated and why you're assessing in that fashion, you probably will get resistance because it is not something that they've encountered in the past. And so I'm sure folks who are here or others who have tried alternative types of assessments with their in different grading schemes and contract grading, et cetera, the first time you do it is always a little bit of a roller coaster. And and some people kind of say, okay, no, I don't think it's a bridge too far for me. But I always recommend that you over communicate with your students about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and don't assume that any of it is familiar, because most likely they've never taken a course that contains these types of assessments before. So, and be prepared to maybe get a hit on your student evals that semester if you're doing it for the first time. I think that that's true across the board with you doing anything innovative. There's likely to be bumps along the way, and it does take some courage on your part to try something new like this.
And perhaps one silver lining is that if folks are diversifying how they assess, and there are multiple sections of the same course being taught, and students are aware of those different options, maybe their experiences will better align with some of those diverse options too. And so maybe it could be a benefit for both the faculty and the students, because you could have students be in a situation where they want to try something different, or they think that contract-based grading could be more efficacious for them, or they're just interested in trying something out of the box. So that's just another thing to consider.
Claudia, does that answer your question or give you more ideas? Or?
It does. I'm an adjunct though, so I don't have have the luxury of really being trashed by my students for lengthy periods of time, and I think that this may take a little bit longer than just the one semester to get the good results, to get the results that I can kind of defend. I love the idea because it breaks my schedule. My syllabus reflects hard work, because it breaks my heart to see a student who's trying so hard and is just a horrible test taker. So, and then there's the other students who are good test takers and they're really bad with writing. So having a lot of different assessments, but assessing on hard work, I think is just so rewarding. I appreciate what you're doing here.
Thanks.
And Claudia, that's a really good point that we've discussed too, as far as what risks different faculty members feel like they can take. And you make a really excellent point.
So do we want to take a look at the Jamboard and see what people are saying? We've got, oh, there's one just popped in. When I grade discussion boards, I do not grade for grammar and spelling. And somebody chimed in with same here. And I try to do the same thing. I tell the students, as long as I can understand what you're trying to say, then I won't deduct for grammar or spelling. Another person offers self-assessments that are required. Multiple attempts on quizzes. The Dear Nan letters, students write me a letter almost weekly about how they are doing, the stickiest point, ideas, etc. It gives me a good understanding of how they are doing, and that is good. And people have eliminated time limits on quizzes and allow unlimited rewrites on all assigned writing, as long as they improve and go deeper. And this green one, I offer a variety of interactions, graded items, and assessments for students. So if one doesn't align with their learning preferences, they have other opportunities to succeed. And one approach is to offer an assessment that a student can fill out and redo as many times as they need to get 100. That's what I like to do, the mastery approach. And then have students develop the questions for a quiz and let them take the final quiz on mastery. I think that's a great idea too. And peer assessment, working with teams. And a lot of people saying, same here, a nice idea. So that's great that I think we're kind of like-minded. And people would like to try ungrading, labor-based grading. I'm writing a new social justice in nursing course and would love to include a self-assessment component as the main focus. That's a great idea. I know here our nursing faculty do something similar, and now the students they do assessments of a patient, a patient assessment, and they have to record those on video and submit those. So they're able to have a conversation about what they've done with the faculty member while they're reviewing it for their one of their summative assessments. I would like to have students create learning portfolios that can be used for self-assessment and metacognition. And somebody here in yellow would like to see research on minoritized populations for specific classroom practices that are known to work and implement those. There might be some resources for that on the website that we shared at the beginning. You might find some things in there. The pink one would love to do ungrading with self-assessment. And then we've got labor-based grading, especially for homework. That's a great place to start it out. Labor-based grading for clinical courses. That's interesting. And the supports that people need. Research findings from colleagues who have done learning outcomes assessment on these practices. I think that would be really helpful. And I would like to work on a pilot of this way of assessment with colleagues. I think that's great. Like a team approach would be great. And that would eliminate that professor shopping, right? If everybody in a department is trying it together. And speak with colleagues who are doing it and ask the students how they feel about the strategies. So mixing strategies and getting feedback. I think that's a great idea. I'm gonna see if anybody wrote anything. I see people added pages because it's easy to do, and I do that myself at times, so. But it looks good. I think there are some great ideas. Oh, and Caitlin is posting in the chat. She said, that was me and I'm in nursing. And she would love to network with other nursing faculty, specifically who are using these strategies. I think that's great. Is there anybody here who is also doing a health field course that's interested in conversing with Caitlin? Or you could private message Caitlin if you want to, I think. So we have this Jamboard. If you hold on to the URL or just, bookmark the page you have open, we keep these open so you can go back and look, or you can post more things later on. And as our group wraps up its work, we're going to look through the Jamboards we've had people supply ideas to from this and previous presentations, and we're going to compile these together as ideas and ways to get started, and things that people are already trying. So that may be something that would be helpful, and that would end up on the innovations and assessment website. And I think if we look back here at our slides, the next one is questions. And so if anybody else has additional questions, you're more than welcome to ask now or post in the chat. If anybody has a follow-up question later on, I'll just put our contact information up here, but you're still welcome. We still have time to answer more questions if anybody has more. So if I click slideshow, will it start right here? What? Should I click it? Okay, good. I was afraid it would go back to the beginning. There's our contact info. Oh, Hope has a raised hand, so let's hear what Hope's question is. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess I love this idea, and yet I'm like, oh God, how do you convince multiple? Because I am always working with teams of professors and internationally, and I've found over the years that when we do collaborations, these international collaborations, that when there's a project, some professors have wanted to do it as extra credit, and then others want to have it to be graded. And when they're put together, the ones that are doing it for extra credit often are gung-ho at the beginning, but then they sort of drift away. And so I feel like I love this idea of ungrading, but I feel like it needs to have some really specific structural sort of guardrails to make sure it will actually work, because I've just seen too much drift. So I feel like I need a pep talk to make sure that this can actually happen, because it's exciting, but it is terrifying.
Well, I think, I'll just take a quick stab and then everyone else can join in. I think that if you're working with a group of instructors, I think that they should all, if they're giving an assignment, they should all be on the same page with whether it's for a grade or not. Because extra credit is inherently unjust. Extra credit is unfair because it's always going to favor the privileged student who had time to get their work done and who had all the resources up front that they needed to finish all the main coursework and then advance onto extra credit. So just the thought of extra credit, to me, it kind of riles me up a little bit because it's just not fair. And so just taking that option off the table and then explaining to all your instructors that if you're going to do this assignment, then it needs to be on assessed however you're going to do it, whether you're going to have a labor-based grading contract about it, or whether you're going to have a one-on-one conference with the student about what sort of a grade they would have earned. But I think the extra credit option needs to just go away personally, but we'll see if anybody else has something to throw in. I see John said that a common approach with ungrading is to give students a rubric at the start of the semester. Yeah, when they develop these labor-based, ungrading, sorry, I'm mixing you up. So have a rubric at the start of the semester, or have them develop it and then use this for their self-assessment. And C. Reed said, thanks for sharing the link. And Chris is smiling at C. Reed. But yeah, back to John's comment, sharing a rubric would probably help eliminate a lot of that, because everyone's going to be on the same page, like a level footing to start with, and they're going to understand the expectations of the assignment. Does that help at all, or do you want to?
Yeah, that's great. And to have the two professors work on a rubric together, but then recognize that it's giving the agency to the students to create. I mean, have the professors create a structure, but then have the students fill it in is a great idea, and actually a great way to start a collaboration too, because they have to agree upon that. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
And I would just add to Hope for, pep talk ideas to explore the resources of Jesse Stommel that I know his link to his presentation was shared in the chat here, but take a look at some of his recordings or some of his resources, and that might be motivating.
Brandon has a really good question, and I think I've struggled to answer this question, so I'm gonna see if anybody else has a better answer than I could come up with, because those of you who've heard about contract grading or labor-based grading, I mean, contract grading more specifically, typically those who contract for an A grade are going to be doing more work, more high level work that requires more time, more labor, right? Versus those who go for a B or a C. And, so how would any of you, I guess, I don't know, not to put you on the spot, Judy, because you were just talking about extra credit. Do you have any thoughts about why you think some of the contract grading would be different and more just than a situation where you're offering extra credit?
Yeah, I think Caitlin addressed it a little bit when she was talking about it earlier, but I don't know. I think it depends a lot on the students' goals. So I don't think I know here in a community college where we have a lot of first generation college students, we know that students have different goals and they're not always a 4.0. So I think that's one thing to consider. Another thing is that starting with the B, if all the students can start with the B and then work extra hard to get the A, I think that is problematic. And I feel like things you can do to help with that would be to make sure that there are resources and support systems in place for those students that are going to need extra help doing the work to, going above and beyond to get the A, like hook them up with the tutoring center that you have, or any lab space or whatever it is they're going to need to make sure they have access to those things outside of regular school hours, or clearly outside of the classroom time, so that they if they do have the time in their day, they can take advantage of the resources when they work for them. And what is John saying here? A good resource on ungrading in a variety of disciplines is Cone and Bloom. Ungrading, why rating students undermines learning and what to do instead. So, but I don't know, does anybody else want to chime in on Brandon's question about?
I can add one additional note. The guaranteed B approach is one that was first advocated by Peter Albo like years ago and has been criticized by ASAL in a way in recent years for similar reasons to Judy's concerns about extra credit. So I think that if that is an approach that you're interested in pursuing, the guaranteed B approach, you would have to be really mindful about the resources, as Judy noted, that you're making sure that all students have a more level playing field, because it certainly can fall into similar pitfalls as the extra credit.
Can I just add one thing really quick? Whether you're going for a guaranteed B or you're providing the students with a set of criteria, regardless of what grade they're going for, if they know specifically what they need to do to achieve a certain grade or to achieve a certain outcome, then I think that's a little bit more helpful for them because they know what they need to do and they have a more clear expectation than if they're given a traditional assessment plus extra credit, because you do the assessment and you don't necessarily have a rubric, you don't necessarily know how you're going to do. But if you know, okay, if I do A, B, and C, this is the grade I'm going to get, then that could be a little bit more comforting for students who like to have that certainty. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, and I think if you look at what Chilton wrote in the chat, I think Megan and Chilton are right there on the same page. Just creating clear expectations at the beginning and making sure that the students know exactly how much work is required for whichever grade it is they wish to attain.
And I would add too that the one option gives the students some control and it gives them some level of choice in how they participate. Also looking at, bumping up from the A to the B, the B to the A requirement, students could also show what they know in different ways. So for example, students who might not be strong writers, but have a really strong sense of the content, an option for them could be to create an infographic where they're sharing the information in a more reduced way in terms of the language they need to use, but they could very successfully convey their understanding of the content, use some different creative skills, and also perhaps even share it with a wider audience that they might, if it's a traditional essay or something like that. And so building in student choice, even within that bumping up from the B to the A, could also be another way to approach that.
I can try to quickly share an example of like an alternative assessment. One of my students just did, he wanted to talk about medical advancements as a result of World War I. And he chose to make a video instead of writing an essay. And so he wrote out all the bullet points he wanted to cover on a whiteboard, and he had them color coded. So he stood in front of his whiteboard and he had his camera and he had a piece of paper taped on the whiteboard, which was his Chicago style bibliography, which is required for history. And then he picked up his iPad and he wanted to show something else. So he's taking a video of himself in front of his whiteboard, showing his iPad, and it was amazing. And he was so animated. And it was just wonderful to watch him present this and get all excited about his topic and hit all his bullet points and have all his sources right there. And so much better than any paper this specific person would have been able to produce in a short period of time. That it was just tremendous to watch that and to see that how much he was enjoying being able to share what he knew instead of being wrapped up in trying to, make sure he's double spaced and using footnotes properly. So I just love watching the students take advantage of those opportunities and just share their learning in a way that gets them very excited about it. And Caitlin is commenting that interestingly, the only students she has ever had ask for extra credit are students who are struggling. But this discussion is helping her think differently about offering it across the board versus not at all. And she said, thank you, and you're welcome.
I don't want anybody to leave this thinking that if you give extra credit to your students, you're a bad person. I think, most of us do it because we have empathy for our students, right? And I think that's why I usually say that the approaches are not at first glance terribly different. It's just that, you try to give that. I always like when you think about, accommodations, right? When you're thinking about universal design and accommodations for students, you say, okay, if you're willing to give every student an accommodation, then you should. Like, why just give it to one student? So if that's the case, then you back up and then you design that, bake that into the course, right? So, the thing with extra credit is that it just forces you into that situation where you're unless you have it. I mean, many of us put it in our syllabus or something like that, but then it becomes if you might as well take that extra step and say, okay, if we're going to do that, if we're going to have different paths for students, if we're going to accommodate students who need extra accommodations because of something that happened, you might as well bake it in. And that's what a lot of these approaches do, rather than having them be one-off negotiations.
Yeah, I would just say though, too, to just be careful, because I've seen a lot of courses. I'm an instructional designer, so I see a lot of courses and how people set up different things. And sometimes it's, if you go to this concert and, write up what you heard, then you'll get extra credit. Or if you go see the speaker, and a lot of these things require time and money outside of the class time that the students just can't do. So even, that's where I say, like, it's inherently unfair, because, I just worry about these kinds of things. But Bob had posted something, which is what I was going to say, and he beat me to it. Or Rob Bills at Binghamton. He said that in his experience, students ask for extra credit to fill in the gaps for assignments they either didn't submit or receive poor scores on. But if they had multiple opportunities to correct their previous assessments, this would make the need for extra credit a non-issue. And I agree with Rob 1000%, because if how you're structuring your course, and how, and like, you have to ask yourself, like, what are you penalizing people for? So if an assignment is due at midnight tonight, if they hand it in at 4 a.m., do they lose 20% because of 4 arbitrary hours when you were sleeping in one grade then anyway? Or, or can we just let that go and say, this is when so what I tell my students is, this is like week 13 ends tomorrow at midnight. Week 14 opens right after. So try to get your week 13 work done so you can move into week 14 on time. But I never penalize their late work, because I don't walk in their shoes and I don't know what other burdens they're carrying on top of their coursework. So if you have a situation like that, a student can still earn all that credit that they missed if they had finished an assignment hastily to meet an arbitrary deadline, or if they didn't have a chance to submit something at all. Here they could make up that work, the same work that you already planned on them doing, the same work you're already planning on grading, and then they would not need extra credit at the end. So, but I don't want to just talk about extra credit.
And just to follow up on what Rob and Chilton were expressing there, giving them the opportunity to revisit and perhaps get additional or bonus points, or, to readjust their grade based upon their additional work they're doing on something that they weren't initially showing their understanding of, re-engages them with the work. And that's what we want them to do, right? We want to be sure that they're understanding, and that's another perspective on it.
And we've run out of time, and I do see Sophia made sure that if she offers extra credit to one, she offers it to all. And I think, yeah, if you're going to offer it, absolutely, that's a great way to do it. And Chris is reinforcing the importance of designing empathy for students into the course, rather than designing a rigid course. And so we want to just point out that next week is week 4 of the symposium, Thursday at 1 o'clock, for re-examining assessing classroom learning using e-portfolios. Also, you can engage in the 4-week assessment challenge. Megan's going to tell you about super quick. And please join us in Oswego on May 31st for CIT.
I just put a link in the chat for the Padlet that Nicole Simon created for us for the 4-week assessment challenge. And the goal of this is just to sort of help you as you move through the implementation stage of any of the strategies you've learned about either this week or anytime through the whole symposium that's been going on during the month of April. So that's going to begin on May 2nd and go through the month of May. So if you would like to implement anything, then please take a look at the Padlet and follow along. And please reach out to us if we can be of help.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.